The elevator doors slide open to reveal the most dangerous man in Seoul, but Soo-rin is too busy sobbing on the marble floor to notice. Her cleaning bucket has been kicked over, and her manager is screaming that she is worthless trash while stepping on her trembling hands. Ki-tae walks past her with a cold, untouchable gaze, his expensive leather shoes narrowly missing her fingers. He doesn't see a human being. He sees an invisible obstacle in his way. As the Mafia Boss moves a lever in the dirt, the light catches a star-shaped scar on his wrist. Soo-rin's heart stops, and a name from forgotten life escapes her lips before she can think to be afraid. "Kiki," she whispers through her tears. The most feared man in the underworld freezes instantly, the cigarette falling from his lips as he turns back with a look of pure shock. In 1 second, the invisible cleaner has just brought the king of the city to his knees with a single childhood nickname. The clock on the wall of the basement locker room ticked like a countdown to a funeral. Soo-rin stared at the reflection in the cracked mirror. She didn't see a 24-year-old woman with dreams. She saw a ghost in a blue work shirt and a wrinkled green apron. Her eyes were rimmed with red, a permanent souvenir from the 3 hours of sleep she had managed between her second and third jobs. In her pocket, her phone vibrated. It was another text from the loan sharks. "Soo-rin, the interest went up this morning. 50 million won by midnight. Will we visit your grandmother's nursing home?" A cold shiver ran down her spine. Her father had left her a legacy of gambling debts and a broken heart before vanishing into the night. Now she was drowning. She gripped the handle of her mop until her knuckles turned white. This job at Kyung-ho Tower was her only hope. It was a place of glass and steel, a corporate fortress that everyone knew was a headquarters for the city's most dangerous men. To the world, it was a tech giant. To those who worked in the shadows, it was the throne of the mafia. "Why are you standing there like a statue? The floor in the East Wing won't scrub itself." The voice belonged to Manager Park. He was a small, bitter man who loved to flex his tiny bit of power over those even lower than him. He strode into the locker room, his face twisted in a sneer. He took a perverse pleasure in making Soo-rin's life a living hell. "I'm going, sir," Soo-rin whispered, keeping her head down. "Go faster. There's a high-level board meeting today. If I see a single fingerprint on the brass handles, I'll deduct a week's pay." He stepped closer, leaning into her personal space. "Actually, I might just fire you today. You look pathetic. You're ruining the aesthetic of this building." Soo-rin didn't look up. She couldn't afford to. "Please, Manager Park. I need this job. I'll work double shifts. I'll clean the vents. Just don't take my pay." Park laughed, a dry, raspy sound. "We'll see. Now move." She pushed her heavy cleaning cart into the hallway. The contrast was jarring. Below, she was a person. Up here, in the marble halls, she was invisible. Wealthy men in tailored suits walked past her as if she were a piece of furniture. She spent her hours scrubbing away the mud they tracked in, polishing the surfaces they touched, and breathing in expensive tobacco smoke they left behind. Her back ached. Her hands were raw from the harsh chemicals. But the fear of the loan sharks was louder than the pain in her muscles. She moved to the restricted executive hallway on the 40th floor. It was silent here, dead silent. She knelt on the floor, attacking a scuff mark with a sponge. She felt like a bug under a giant's boot. She thought about her childhood. She remembered a time before the debt. There was a boy back then in the orphanage. He was the only person she had ever protected. He was the only person who had ever made her feel like she mattered. But he was gone. Everyone was gone. Suddenly, the manager appeared again, his face red with rage. He saw a small puddle of water near her bucket. "You clumsy girl. You're making a mess." Without warning, he swung his foot, kicking the bucket. Gray, soapy water exploded across the floor, soaking Soo-rin's shoes and apron. "Clean it up. Now," he hissed. Soo-rin stayed on her knees, the cold water seeping into her clothes. A single tear escaped, rolling down her cheek. She was at the end of her rope. She was exhausted, broke and broken. She just wanted to disappear. The humiliation felt like a heavy weight on Soo-rin's chest. She didn't even try to stand up. She just stared at the dirty water spreading across the expensive marble. Manager Park was still hovering over her, his voice a sharp needle in her ear. "Stop crying. You're making the floor even wetter with those pathetic tears." Park snapped. He reached down and grabbed her shoulder, shaking her. "Do you hear me? If Mr. Kong sees you like this, he'll have both of us thrown off the roof. Get it together." Su-Rin didn't answer. She tucked her head lower, her bangs falling over her eyes. Her shoulders hunched as she tried to stifle her sobs. She felt like a wounded animal. Suddenly, the air in the hallway changed. It grew heavy and cold. The distant sound of the private elevator dinged. A rhythmic, heavy thud of footsteps began to echo against the walls. It was a sound of power. It was the sound of someone who owned the ground they walked on. "He's here," Park whispered, his voice suddenly full of terror. He let go of Su-Rin and scrambled to stand at attention, bowing so low his forehead almost touched his knees. Su-Rin stayed on the floor. She couldn't move. She watched through the veil of her hair as a group of men in black suits marched into view. In the center was a man who looked like he was carved from obsidian. Kite. He was wearing a black luxury suit that fit his broad shoulders perfectly. His hair was slicked back, revealing a sharp, cruel jawline. A cigarette was clamped between his lips, a thin trail of smoke following him. His eyes were focused straight ahead, cold and unblinking. He didn't look at Manager Park. He didn't look at the wet floor. And he certainly didn't look at the crying girl in the blue shirt. To Kite, she was just a shadow. He began to step over the puddle, his polished leather shoe passing inches from Su-Rin's face. But as he moved, his hand swung slightly. His white dress shirt was pulled back just an inch by the movement of his arm. There, on the inside his wrist, was a jagged, star-shaped scar. It was old, white with age, but unmistakable. Su-Rin's breath hitched. Her heart did a violent somersault in her chest. She knew that scar. She had seen it happen. She was the one who had held his hand while it bled 15 years ago in the darkness of a burning building. "Wait," she whispered. It was so quiet she didn't think anyone heard her. Kite didn't stop. He kept walking. Desperation flared in her. The debt, the manager, the pain, it all vanished. Only the scar mattered. She looked up, her red, watery eyes fixing on his retreating back. "Kiki," she called out. The name was small. It was a childhood secret. A nickname only 2 people in the world knew. The effect was instantaneous. Kite didn't just stop. He froze. It was as if he had been turned to stone. The cigarette fell from his mouth, hitting the wet floor with a soft hiss. The guards behind him bumped into each other, confused by the sudden halt. The silence that followed was terrifying. It was a silence before a storm. Kite stood with his back to her for a long, agonizing moment. Then, slowly, painfully slowly, he turned around. His cold, arrogant expression was gone. His eyes were wide, vibrating with a mix of shock, confusion, and a sudden, sharp pain. He looked down at the girl on the floor. He looked at her messy ponytail, her wrinkled apron, and her tear-stained face. "What did you call me?" His voice rasped. It wasn't the voice of a mafia boss. It was the voice of a boy who had been found after being lost for a long time. Manager Park turned pale. "Sir, I am so sorry. She's crazy. She's just a stupid cleaner. I'll have her removed immediately." Kite didn't even look at Park. He raised a trembling hand, silenced the manager with a single gesture, and stepped toward Su-Rin. The executive penthouse was a place of shadows and cold glass. The city of Seoul sprawled out below like a carpet of diamonds, but inside, the atmosphere was suffocating. Kite sat behind a massive desk of dark wood. He had lit another cigarette, but he wasn't smoking it. He just watched the ember burn. Su-Rin stood in the center of the room. She felt tiny. The luxury of the office made her cleaning uniform look even more pathetic. 2 massive guards stood by the door, their faces like granite. "Speak," Kite commanded. His voice had returned to its icy, dangerous tone. "How do you know that name? Who sent you?" Su-Rin trembled, her hands clasped tightly in front of her dark green apron. "Nobody sent me, Kite. I work here. I've worked here for 6 months." Kite slammed his hand on the desk, the sound echoing like a gunshot. "Don't use my name," And don't lie to me. That nickname died 15 years ago. The only person who knew it is dead. Everyone from that place is dead. He stood up and walked around the desk. He was much taller than her. He leaned in close, the scent of expensive tobacco and cedarwood surrounding her. He gripped her chin, forcing her to look into his intense, dark eyes. Are you a spy for the Japanese syndicate? Did they find my old records? His voice was a low growl. If you don't tell me the truth, you won't leave this building. I don't care how many tears you cry. Surin looked back at him. She saw the monster he had become, but she also saw the boy with the star-shaped scar. The fear was there, but beneath it was a strange sense of calm. She had nothing left to lose. You used to cry when the lights went out, she said softly. Kite flinched as if she had slapped him. His grip on her chin tightened, but his eyes wavered. You hated the smell of the cabbage soup they served on Tuesdays, she continued, her voice gaining strength. And you had a wooden soldier with a broken leg. You called him General. You told me that one day you would become a general so you could protect me. Kite's face went pale. He let go of her chin and took a step back, his breathing becoming shallow. Shut up. Stop it. Why are you so afraid, Kiki? Surin asked, a single tear falling. Is it because I'm a cleaner? Is it because the boy who promised to protect me is now the man everyone's afraid of? The guards moved forward, sensing their boss's distress. But Kite roared at them. Get out. Everyone get out. Now. The guards hesitated, then bowed and hurried out of the room, closing the heavy doors with soft thud. Kite turned back to her. He looked vulnerable, his polished mask cracking. He reached out, his fingers hovering near the star-shaped scar on his wrist. If you are who you say you are, he whispered, his voice shaking with a mix of hope and terror. Then tell me about the night the world ended. Tell me about the fire. Surin took a deep breath. This was the moment, the secret she had carried in the dark, while scrubbing floors and dodging debt collectors, was finally coming to light. The silence in the penthouse was heavy. Surin closed her eyes for a moment, and the smell of the expensive office disappeared. It was replaced by the acrid, choking scent of smoke and burning wood. It was a Friday, Surin began, her voice low and steady. The heaters in the basement were old. They had been making noise for weeks, but the headmaster didn't care. He spent the repair money on his own whiskey. Kite stood perfectly still, his eyes fixed on her. He looked like he was holding his breath. I woke up because I heard you coughing, she continued. You were only 10. I was 12. We were in the small room near the kitchen. The hallway was already orange with flames. Everyone was screaming, but the doors were locked from the outside to keep us from running away at night. Kite's jaw tightened, his hands balled into fists at his sides. You were trapped under a fallen beam, Surin said, her eyes opening and meeting his. The wood was glowing. You tried to push it off, and that's when it happened. The sharp edge of the metal bracket sliced your wrist. You didn't even scream. You just looked at me with those big, terrified eyes and told me to run. You told me to leave you. A small sound escaped Kite's throat, a choked sob that he tried to hide behind a cough. I didn't leave, Surin whispered. I grabbed a piece of heavy cloth and soaked it in the water bucket. I wrapped my hands and I pulled. I pulled until my skin blistered. When the beam finally moved, I dragged you to the laundry vent. It was the only way out. I pushed you through first. I told you keep running and never look back. She reached out, tentatively touching the star-shaped scar on his wrist. He didn't pull away this time. His skin was hot. I watched you disappear into the woods, she said. Then the roof collapsed. I barely made it out through the back cellar. By the time I got to the tree line, you were gone. I spent weeks looking for you. I went to every shelter, every hospital, but you had vanished. I thought you died. I thought I had saved you just to let the world swallow you up. Kite looked down at her hands. He saw the faint, white lines of old burn scars on her palms, marks she usually hid with cleaning gloves. He took her hands in his. His large, powerful fingers were trembling. I waited by the old bridge for 3 days, Kite said, his voice cracking. I thought you were right behind me. When you didn't come, I thought you chose to stay behind. I thought you hated me for being a burden. I never hated you, Su-rin said. I was just a child trying to keep another child alive. Kite pulled her into a sudden, crushing hug. He buried his face in her shoulder, the Mafia Boss disappearing entirely. For a moment, they were just two orphans in a burning world. Finally finding the only person who ever truly knew them. I looked for you, he whispered into her hair. Once I had power, I looked for Su-rin from the Sunshine Home. But the records were burned. I thought you were a ghost. He pulled back, his eyes hardening with a new kind of intensity. He looked at her wrinkled, wet uniform. He looked at her tired face. You've been cleaning my floors, he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous protective register. You've been kneeling at my feet while I walked past you. And that man, that dog in the hallway, he put his hands on you. The air in the room grew cold again. But this time, the cold wasn't directed at Su-rin. It was a weapon, and it was being turned toward the world that had dared to mistreat her. The elevator doors opened back on the 40th floor. The hallway was crowded. Security guards, office staff, and executives were all whispering, wondering why the boss had personally taken a lowly cleaner to his private penthouse. Manager Park was at the center of the crowd, looking smug. He had convinced himself that Su-rin was being punished. He had even brought a box to pack her things. She's done for, Park was telling a group of interns. I told her she was trash. Now the boss is taking out the garbage. Maybe I'll get a promotion for reporting her. The crowd went silent as Kite stepped out of the elevator. He didn't look like the man who had been crying moments ago. He looked like a god of war. His aura was so suffocating that people backed away, hitting the walls. Beside him walked Su-rin. She was still in her wet uniform, but Kite's heavy cashmere suit jacket was draped over her shoulders. It was a sign of ownership and protection that left everyone breathless. Kite stopped in front of Manager Park. The manager bowed so quickly he nearly tripped. Sir, is the situation handled? Shall I call the police to take her away? Park asked, his voice shaking with fake excitement. Kite looked at Park as if he were an insect. You kicked her bucket, he said softly. Park blinked, confused. Sir, you told her she was as replaceable as the dirt on the floor, Kite continued, his voice rising in volume. You stepped on the hand that saved my life. The entire hallway gasped. Park's face went from pale to ghostly white. I didn't know, sir. She's just a cleaner. I was just maintaining discipline. Kite moved so fast it was a blur. He grabbed Park by the throat and slammed him against a marble wall. The sound of the impact was sickening. She is not a cleaner, Kite hissed into Park's face. She is the only reason I am breathing today. And you are the dirt. Kite let go, and Park collapsed to the floor, gasping for air. You're fired, Kite announced to the silent hallway. Not just from this company. You are blacklisted from every job in this country. If I see your face in Seoul by sunset, you won't need a resume. You'll need a coffin. He turned to the head of security, who was standing nearby, trembling. Listen to me carefully, Kite said, his voice echoing to the entire floor. This woman is Su-rin. From this moment on, her word is my word. If she wants a floor cleaned, you clean it. If she wants a room moved, you move it. He looked around at the stunned faces of the employees. But most importantly, Kite growled, if I ever see her crying again, if anyone in this building makes her feel small or invisible or sad, I will not fire you. I will burn this entire building to the ground with all of you inside. Do I make myself clear? Yes, sir. 100 voices shouted in unison. Kite turned back to Su-rin. His expression softened for a fraction of a second. He took her hand, the one with the burned scars, and kissed it in front of everyone. Let's go home, Su-rin, he said softly. You've cleaned enough for a lifetime. From now on, the world will clean itself for you. As he led her back toward the elevator, Su-rin felt the weight of the suit jacket on her shoulders. For the first time in 15 years, the invisible girl felt like she was finally standing in the light. But she knew the mafia world was dangerous. Being the boss's weakness was just as scary as being his cleaner. The debt was gone, but a new, deadlier game had just begun. The transformation of Surin began the moment the elevator reached the top floor of Kitae's private residence. It was a sprawling, minimalist penthouse that overlooked the city like an eagle's nest. The walls were glass, the furniture was dark leather, and the air was filled with a scent of expensive quiet. "This is too much, Kitae," Surin whispered, clutching the oversized suit jacket around her. She looked at her reflection in the polished obsidian floor, the blue work shirt, the stained apron, the messy ponytail. She felt like a smudge of dirt on a diamond. Kitae didn't look at her with pity. He looked at her with a hunger for justice. He snapped his fingers, and a team of professional stylists and personal shoppers, who had been waiting in the foyer, stepped forward. "Burn the uniform," Kitae ordered, his voice echoing. "I want her to look like she owns the city, because from today she does." The next few hours were a blur. Surin was scrubbed, pampered, and dressed in fabrics she didn't know existed. They chose a dress of deep emerald silk that complemented her soft features, but gave her a sharp, regal edge. Her hair was let down in elegant waves, and her face was touched with just enough makeup to hide the fatigue of 3 years of double shifts. When she finally stepped out, Kitae was standing by the window, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He turned, and the glass nearly slipped from his fingers. He didn't see a cleaner. He saw the woman she was always meant to be. "You look," he paused, his throat dry, "you look like the girl who saved me. Only now, you have the armor to match your heart." He walked over and handed her a small, velvet box. Inside was a black credit card and a set of keys. "No more buses. No more locker rooms. You stay here. This is your fortress now." Surin looked at the card, her fingers trembling. "I don't know how to be this person, Kiki." "You don't have to do anything," Kitae said, stepping close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him. "Just exist. I will handle the world for you." That evening, Kitae dismissed all the servants. He wanted the penthouse to be a tomb for their secrets. He had ordered a very specific meal: simple rice, spicy jjigae, and a side of dried seaweed. It was the exact meal they used to share on the rare holidays at the orphanage when the headmaster was too drunk to notice food missing from the kitchen. They sat on the floor of the multi-million-dollar living room, ignoring the grand dining table. For a moment, the Mafia Boss was gone. "Do you remember when we tried to build a raft out of those old milk crates?" Kitae asked, a small, genuine smile breaking across his face. Surin laughed, the sound bright and clear. "You fell into the pond before we even touched the water. I had to dry your clothes over the candle in the basement, so you wouldn't get in trouble." Kitae's smile faded into something more somber. He reached out and touched the star-shaped scar on his wrist. "After the fire, I thought I had lost my anchor. I became a monster because I thought the only way to never be hurt again was to be the one holding the knife. I grew rich, but I grew cold." He looked at Surin's hands. Now that they were clean of soap and dirt, he could see the faint, white lines of old burned scars on her palms, marks in the days she dragged him to the laundry vent. "I lived in luxury while you were scrubbing floors," Kitae whispered, his voice cracking with guilt. "You were starving and hiding from debt while I was buying buildings. Why didn't you find me?" "I didn't even know you were alive," Surin said softly, taking his hand. "I was just happy to survive another day. I didn't need riches, Kiki. I just needed to know that the boy I saved was okay." Kitae pulled her hand to his face, closing his eyes. The realization hit him like a physical blow. His Nuna had suffered for 15 years while he sat on a throne. He vowed silently that he would spend the rest of his life making sure she never held a mop again. The peace of the penthouse was interrupted the following night by a mandatory family dinner. Kitae insisted Surin attend. He wanted the underworld to know she was under his protection. The restaurant was a private, underground club where the air was thick with the smell of expensive cigars and old blood. Among the guests was Elena, a high-ranking associate and the daughter of a powerful mob boss who had long expected to marry Kitae to unite their empires. Elena stared at Surin with narrowed, hateful eyes. During the second course, she spoke loud enough for the entire table to hear. "Kitae, darling, I heard you found a new treasure. But really, a cleaning girl? I hope you had the chair disinfected before she sat down." The table went silent. The other men chuckled nervously. Soo-rin felt the heat rise to her face, the old feeling of being trash threatening to resurface. Elena leaned forward, smirking. "Tell me, dear, does the silk feel strange against skin that's usually covered in bleach? Or are you just waiting for us to finish, so you can clear the plates?" Soo-rin opened her mouth to speak, but Kite moved faster. He didn't raise his voice, which made him even more terrifying. He picked up his steak knife and drove it into the table with a deafening thud, just inches from Elena's perfectly manicured hand. "Elena," Kite said, his voice a low, lethal growl, "the only reason you are still breathing is because of your father's service to my family. But if you speak to her again, or even look at her without respect, I will personally escort you to the basement." He turned to the room, his gaze sweeping over the most dangerous men in Seoul. "This woman is Soo-rin. She is not a guest. She is my heart. If you humiliate her, you humiliate me. And you all know what happens to people who disrespect the boss." Elena turned pale and sank back into her seat. Kite took Soo-rin's hand under the table, squeezing it firmly. He was telling the world that she was the queen, and he was her shield. The next morning, Kite's intelligence team delivered a file to his desk. It contained everything about Soo-rin's life: her father's gambling history, her grandmother's nursing home, and the names of the loan sharks who had been threatening her. When Kite saw the interest rates and the threat text they had sent to her phone, his office temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Bring them to the warehouse," Kite ordered. "Not the police. Me." An hour later, Kite stood in a dark, damp warehouse at the docks. 3 men, thugs who made a living preying on the weak, were tied to chairs, looking terrified. They didn't know why the great Kite was interested in them. "You have a client named Soo-rin," Kite said, pacing slowly in front of them. She owes us money, boss." "Business is business," the lead thug stammered. Kite smiled, but there was no warmth in it. He pulled out a thick stack of cash and threw it at the man's feet. Then he pulled out a heavy iron rod. "That is the 50 million won she owes you," Kite said. "And this," he swung the rod, shattering the wooden table next to them, "is the interest for every tear she cried because of your phone calls." He spent the next 30 minutes cleaning her past. He didn't just pay the debt. He made sure those men would never be able to hold a phone, let alone send a threatening text ever again. He wiped her name from every ledger in the underworld. By the time he walked out, Soo-rin was finally legally and completely free. When Kite returned to the penthouse, he found Soo-rin on the balcony, looking out at the city lights. She looked peaceful, but there was a lingering sadness in her eyes. "It's done," Kite said, stepping up behind her. "The debt is gone. The men who hurt you are gone. You never have to look over your shoulder again." Soo-rin turned to him, her eyes shining with gratitude. "Thank you, Kite. Truly, you've given me a life I never thought I could have." The moonlight caught the sharp lines of his face. He looked at her with an intensity that made her breath hitch. He reached out, his thumb brushing a stray hair from her forehead. The air between them hummed with 15 years of unspoken longing. "I don't want to just give you a life, Soo-rin," he whispered. "I want to be the one you live it with." He leaned in, his lips inches from hers. Soo-rin felt the pull. She loved the boy he was and the man he had become. But as his lips brushed hers in a soft, tentative kiss, a cold realization hit her. She looked at the blood on his cuff from the warehouse. She looked at the cold, hard city he ruled with violence. She pulled away, her heart racing. "I can't," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Why?" Kite asked, hurt flashing in his eyes. "Because this world is full of blood and guns, Kite," Soo-rin said, gesturing to the penthouse. "I'm a girl who likes the smell of clean floors and quiet mornings. You're a king in a world of monsters. I'm afraid that if I stay, the fire will eventually finish what it started 15 years ago. I don't belong here." She turned and ran into her room, leaving Kite alone on the balcony. He stood in the silence, realizing that while he could buy her the world, he still hadn't figured out how to keep his world from breaking her. The piece in the penthouse was a fragile glass wall, and it shattered the moment Kite was lured away by a falsified emergency. A high-priority shipment inspection in Busan had been flagged as a security breach, requiring the boss's personal presence. It was a calculated setup, a masterclass in betrayal orchestrated by the mafia elders who had watched Kitae's transformation with growing disgust. Led by the bitter chairman Oh, the council had decided that Surin was a virus of compassion that was making their lethal leader soft. To them, a mafia boss who cared for a cleaner was a liability that could bring their entire criminal empire to its knees. He is blinded by the ghost of an orphan girl. Chairman Oh hissed during a secret assembly in the dark, wood-paneled boardroom of Kyung-ho Tower. He is clearing debts, firing managers, and ignoring our profit margins, all for a woman who belongs in the basement. If he won't get rid of his own weakness, we will do it for him. We will prune this branch before the tree dies. Han, Kitae's second in command, stood in the corner of the room, his eyes like chips of ice. He had been promised Kitae's throne if he assisted in removing the distraction. The boss is already 5 hours away on the high-speed rail, Han reported, his voice devoid of emotion. The security detail at the penthouse has been swapped with my hand-picked men. She thinks she is safe. She thinks she is home. She has no idea she is sitting in a cage. Back at the penthouse, Surin sat in the living room, trying to focus on a book, but a strange, heavy sense of dread had settled in her chest. The silence of the apartment felt different, colder, sharper. She looked at the city lights, waiting for Kitae's call, when the heavy front doors clicked open. She stood up with a smile, expecting to see him, but her heart dropped when Han stepped into the light, followed by 4 men she didn't recognize. Their faces held no respect, only the cold, predatory gaze of men who saw her as an object to be moved. "Mr. Han, what are you doing here? Where's Kitae?" Surin asked, her voice trembling as she backed away toward the floor-to-ceiling windows. "The boss is busy chasing a ghost in Busan," Han said, pulling a pair of heavy, industrial zip ties from his pocket. He signaled to the guards, who moved to flank her. "And you, Surin, are an expensive mistake that is about to be erased from the ledger. You were a ghost for 15 years. It's time you went back to being one." Surin realized then that the invisible life she had once lived was a luxury compared to the target now on her back. She was no longer a cleaner or a guest. She was the bait in a coup that could cost the only person she loved his life. As they moved toward her, she didn't scream for herself. She prayed for the boy with the star-shaped scar. The world became a blur of freezing wind and the overwhelming smell of salt water. Surin had been roughly handled, her mouth covered with heavy duct tape and her wrists bound behind her back until the plastic zip ties bit deep into her skin. She wasn't taken to a fancy hotel or a hidden office. As the sliding doors of the black van groaned open, she recognized the jagged silhouette of rusted cranes and the rotting smell of the Incheon docks. This was the exact place where her father had lost his final bet. It was the place where the loan sharks used to drag her to threaten her life when she couldn't pay the interest. The irony was a jagged knife in her heart. She had escaped the life of a blue-collar cleaner, only to end up exactly where her tragedy began. The ghosts of her past seemed to mock her as Han grabbed her by the arm and pulled her toward the edge of the pier. "Tie her to the crane post," Han ordered, his voice echoing against the metal containers. The men dragged her to the very edge of the concrete pier. Below, the dark, freezing water of the yellow sea churned violently, a black abyss waiting to swallow anything that fell. They tied her to a rusted iron post, the very edge of the dock crumbling under her heels. The wind whipped her hair across her face, stinging her eyes, but she kept them wide, searching the darkness. "Kitae is on his way," Han said, checking the glowing face of his luxury watch. "He received the video of us taking you. He thinks he's coming here to negotiate. He thinks his money and his reputation still mean something to us. He doesn't realize that he's walking into his own funeral. The elders have authorized a full strike. The moment he steps onto this pier, he dies, and you get a front row seat to the end of your hero." Surin struggled against her bonds, her muffled screams of protest lost in the howling gale. She didn't fear the water below or the men with guns surrounding her. Her only fear was that her presence was the very weapon Han was using to kill Kitae. She had saved her from a fire as a child, but now her existence was a fire that was burning his empire down. She looked at the single road leading to the docks. She wanted him to stay away. She wanted him to choose his power over her. But she knew the boy who shared his candy and cried in the dark would never leave her behind. She wept behind the tape, not for her own life, but for the beautiful, dangerous man who was about to sacrifice everything for a girl who used to mop his floors. The silence of the docks was shattered by the scream of a high-powered engine. A lone black SUV tore through the industrial gates, drifting around the corner in a cloud of dust and gravel before screeching to a halt. The headlights cut through the fog, blinding the mercenaries for a split second. Kite stepped out. He wasn't the polished CEO the city knew. He wasn't wearing his suit jacket or his silk tie. He stood in a black tactical shirt, his sleeves rolled up to reveal the star-shaped scar on his wrist. In his hand was a heavy iron crowbar, a tool he had snatched from a maintenance shed. He looked like a man who had walked out of a nightmare. "Let her go, Han," Kite said. His voice wasn't a shout. It was a low, vibrating growl that held the weight of a death sentence. "You're alone, Kite." Han laughed, though his hand shook as he signaled the 20 armed men hiding behind the shipping containers to step out. "You gave up your guards, your status, and your common sense for a cleaner. Look at you. You look like a common street thug." "I was never CEO, Han," Kite said, his eyes finally fixing on Su Rin, seeing her tied to that rusted post, her face bruised and her eyes full of terror. Snapped the last thread of his composure. The civilized man he had tried to become for her died in that instant. "I was always a monster. I only put on the suit to make her feel safe. But since you took her safety away, you don't get the boss. You get the beast." Kite didn't wait for them to fire. He moved with a feral, unnatural speed. He didn't use a gun. He used a crowbar in his bare hands, fighting with a desperation that turned him into a ghost in the shadows. He used a container for cover, flanking the mercenaries before they could stabilize their aim. The sound of breaking bones, grunts of pain, and suppressed gunfire filled the air. He took a bullet to the thigh, but he didn't even flinch. He was a force of nature, driven by 15 years of guilt and a lifetime of love. He tore through Han's elite guards as if they were made of paper, his only focus being the girl at the edge of the pier. He wasn't fighting for an empire. He was fighting for the only person who had ever seen the boy behind the scar. One by one, the men fell until only the scent of iron and gunpowder remained in the cold sea air. The dock was a graveyard of broken men and shattered glass. Kite stood in the center of the carnage, his chest heaving, his shirt soaked in sweat and blood. He was wounded in 3 places, his face masked in a layer of grime and crimson, but he remained standing. Only Han was left, backing away toward the edge of the pier, where Su Rin was still bound. Han's bravado had vanished, replaced by the twitching terror of a man who knew he was about to die. In a final, cowardly act of spite, he pulled a small backup pistol from his ankle holster. "If I'm going down, I'm taking your heart with me," he shrieked, his voice cracking with insanity. He didn't aim at Kite. He aimed the barrel directly at Su Rin's chest. "No!" Su Rin's voice tore through the duct tape as she managed to hook her bound hands over a rusted lever on the crane post. As Han's finger tightened on the trigger, Su Rin didn't think about her future or her fear. She threw her entire weight forward with a violent surge of adrenaline. The rusted zip ties snapped against the sharp metal edge of the post, and she lunged in front of the man she had loved since they were children. The crack of the gunshot was a deafening roar that echoed across the dark water. Su Rin felt a sudden, blinding heat in her shoulder, followed by a wave of cold numbness that spread through her body. She didn't feel pain yet, only the sensation of falling. Kite was there in a heartbeat, catching her before her head hit the concrete, his roar of agony louder than the gun. "Su Rin, no, 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 no!" Kite screamed, his voice breaking into 1,000 pieces. He ignored Han, who was immediately tackled and subdued by a secondary team of Kite's truly loyal men who had finally arrived. Kite only saw the red spreading across Su Rin's white sweater. It was the same shade as the fire 15 years ago. He pressed his shaking hands against the wound, his tears mixing with the blood on his skin. "I save you again." "Kiki," Su Rin whispered, her voice a faint thread, but her eyes were bright with strange peace. "Don't you dare leave me." Kite sobbed, his forehead pressed against hers. You stayed in the fire for me then. You stay here now. That's an order. Nuna, stay with me. I'm not going anywhere, she breathed, her fingers weakly clutching the star-shaped scar on his wrist. I'm just done cleaning up after you. She closed her eyes, and for a terrifying moment, the only sound was the wind. 6 months later, the gray, suffocating towers of Seoul felt like a dream from another life. Ki-tae had done what no one in the history of the Korean underworld had ever dared. He walked away. He had dismantled the Kyung-ho group, liquidating the illegal sectors and turning the legitimate business over to a neutral trust. He had burned the ledgers, silenced the elders, and used everyone as fortune for a different kind of power. On an emerald green hill overlooking the southern coast, a bright, sun-drenched building stood. It was made of warm wood and glass, and a sign above the entrance read, "The Kiki and Surin Foundation." It wasn't a corporate office. It was a home and a school for the city's forgotten children. Surin stood on the wide porch, her shoulder fully healed but bearing a small, faint scar, a twin to the one on Ki-tae's wrist. She watched a group of children playing in the yard, their laughter carrying on the sea breeze. She wasn't wearing a blue uniform or a red silk dress. She wore a simple sweater and a smile that reached her eyes. Ki-tae walked out of the building, carrying 2 mugs of tea. He wore a casual linen shirt, the hard, predatory lines of his face softened by a quiet, steady peace. He sat on the bench next to her, looking at the children and then at her. The last of the legal transfers cleared this morning, Ki-tae said, leaning his head against hers. I'm officially a civilian, Surin, just a man with a scarred wrist and a very small bank account. Surin leaned in and kissed his cheek, her heart full. You're not a civilian. You're the man who kept his promise. You became a general to protect the ones who have no one else to fight for them. Ki-tae looked at the children, then back at the woman who had saved him twice. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple, elegant gold band. It wasn't a symbol of a mafia empire or a corporate title. Surin, he said, his voice thick with emotion, you saved me from the fire and you saved me from the dark. Will you stay with me while we build something that can never be burned down? Surin didn't need to answer with words. She kissed him, a kiss that tasted of freedom and a future they had both bled to earn. As the sun set over the ocean, casting a golden glow over the house they had built together, the invisible girl and the monster were gone. There was only a man and a woman, finally home.